1:12 a.m., the kind of hour that makes every streetlight look tired. The rain wasn't loud tonight. It was steady, patient, like it had all the time in the world, and I didn't. I drove with the heater on and still felt cold. That's how it works in this city. The cold isn't weather, it's memory. Back in my office, the blinds were half closed, and the neon from across the street bled through in thin stripes. My desk looked the same as always. Paper, smoke stains, a cheap lamp that hummed when it got nervous. But something was different. Something small. Something placed. A receipt sat in the center of my blotter like it owned the spot. Not crumpled, not tossed, set down flat, perfectly square. Like a promise written by a man who never keeps them. The paper was thin, damp at the edges, and stamped with a mark I recognized from years ago. The kind of mark you only notice after it ruins your week. Port Authority. Under the stamp, a string of numbers, a date, a time, and one line that made my throat tighten the way it does when the truth reaches for your collar. Yard schedule, paid in full. No name, no signature, just payment confirmed. I stared at it until the ink felt like it was staring back. The city loves receipts. Receipts are how it proves you owe something, even when you don't remember buying it. My hand went to my coat pocket without thinking. The spare key was there. Cold metal, sharp edges, small enough to forget, heavy enough to change a life. In the other pocket, the ledger copy pressed against my ribs like a second heartbeat. Proof, or bait. In this town, those are cousins. The phone on my desk was silent, but I could feel it, the way you can feel an animal in the dark, waiting, listening. I didn't pick it up. I didn't have to. Whoever ran this game had learned something about me. I don't need a call. I'll walk into the trap on my own, as long as the trap is shaped like an answer. I turned the receipt over. On the back, in clean type, were 3 words: night shift window. And beneath that, an address. Not downtown, not the harbor, something in between. A place where trucks stop and people don't ask questions, because questions cost time, and time costs money. I sat down slow, let the chair take my weight, let the rain talk against the glass. A man in an ash-gray suit flashed in my mind, thin smile, eyes that never carry guilt because they don't carry anything. He'd said it was business. This receipt was business. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket with the key. 2 little pieces of metal and paper, and suddenly I had a direction. Directions are dangerous. They make you believe there's an exit. Outside, the rain kept falling, even and calm, like it knew I was going back out, like it knew I couldn't help myself. I turned off my lamp. The office went dim. The neon stripes stayed. I locked the door behind me. Not because locks matter, because the sound of a lock makes a man feel like he's still choosing something. And then I went to meet the night shift. The place was called Marlowe's, which told me 2 things right away. Whoever named it had a sense of humor, and whoever worked there had heard every joke a lonely man can make at 2 in the morning. It sat under a flickering sign beside a service road, the kind of road that doesn't show up on tourist maps. Windows fogged from heat and cheap coffee, A parking lot full of tired cars and trucks that looked like they'd been living there. Inside, the air was warm and smelled like grease, soap, and time. A low radio played something soft and old, like the station was afraid of waking anybody up. The booths were vinyl and cracked. The floor had been mopped, but the past doesn't come off easy. A waitress moved slow, like she'd learned that speed doesn't help at this hour. She poured coffee into a cup that had seen better decades and slid it toward me without asking. That told me she knew my face, or she knew my type. I wrapped my hands around the cup. Heat, real heat. For a second, it felt like a favor. At the far end of the counter, under a small sign that read, "Night Shift Window," there was a little booth with glass on 3 sides, like a bank teller's cage, like a confession box. A man sat inside it, old enough to remember when secrets were written on paper, and young enough to still sell them. He wore a plain shirt, sleeves rolled up, and a thin chain around his neck that disappeared under the collar. His hands moved with the calm of someone who sorts money and lies for a living. He didn't look up when I approached. He didn't have to. He was already expecting me. I placed the receipt on the counter, pushed it forward, and watched his eyes flick to it like it was a familiar face. He sighed quietly, not annoyed, not surprised, more like resigned. Like the city had handed him the same problem again, and he'd never been allowed to refuse it. "You're late," he said. I didn't react. "I'm on time. The schedule's paid in full." A faint smile touched his mouth and died immediately. "That's what the paper says." He slid the receipt back to me, but his fingers didn't leave it right away. He held it for a beat, like he could feel the weight of the payment through the ink. Then he looked up. His eyes were pale, tired, and careful. "You have it?" he asked. My hand went to my pocket. I didn't pull the key out yet. In this town, showing the key is how you lose it. "I have a lot of things," I said. "You'll need to be specific." His gaze didn't move. "The spare." The word hung there between us. Spare. Like it was harmless. Like it wasn't the only thing keeping me from being a missing file. I set the coffee down. The cup made a soft click. Quiet sounds matter when the rest of the world is asleep. "I'm not handing it over," I said. He nodded once, slow, like he'd expected that, like the city had told him I'd say it. He reached under the counter and pulled out a small metal tray with a single object on it. A matchbook, black cover, gold letters, no logo, no business name, just a number stamped on the inside flap, a locker number, and beneath it, in tiny print, a word that made my stomach turn. Port. My eyes went back to his. "Where is it?" He lifted one shoulder. "Where they keep what they don't want in the light." "That's not an address." His face stayed calm. "It's the only one you'll get." He slid the matchbook toward me through the slot in the glass, slow, like he was feeding an animal that might bite. Then he said, quiet enough that even the coffee couldn't overhear, "You're carrying something they can't allow." My fingers tightened around the matchbook. The ledger. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. On the counter beside the booth, there was a row of small rental mailboxes, old, dented, each with a tiny keyhole. People keep letters there. People keep cash there. People keep the parts of their lives they don't want traced to their front door. One box had a strip of tape across it, fresh and clean,
like it had just been marked for me. 17. Pier 17. The fog. The harbor that forgets. The city was laughing softly again. It always does when it thinks you've started to understand. I took a breath that tasted like coffee and old smoke and made my choice without moving my face. I pulled the spare key out of my pocket. The night clerk's eyes dropped to it and stayed there, like he couldn't help himself, like the key had gravity. "Not that lock," he said. I slid the key back into my palm. "Then why bring me here?" His voice went even lower. "Because the key isn't for doors." He looked past me, toward the dark windows, toward the parking lot where rain slid down hoods and windshields like slow tears. "The key is for people," he said. "It opens what they've closed inside themselves." I didn't like that. Keys shouldn't do that. Keys should open a box, a room, a way out. But I'd learned something in this city. The only thing worse than a locked door is an unlocked truth. I turned toward Mai.
The metal was cold. The slot was small. The kind of small that makes a man slow down. I tried the matchbook number first. Habit. A way to pretend there's a system. There usually isn't. The key for Mailbox 17 wasn't on my ring. That was the point. I looked back at the night clerk. He tapped the glass once with a knuckle. Just once. A quiet signal. Then he reached beneath the counter again and pulled out a thin envelope. Beige. Unmarked. The kind of envelope that never carries good news. He slid it through the slot like it was nothing. Inside was a tiny brass key. Old. Scratched. Warm from his hand. "Who paid you?" I asked. He didn't blink. "Does it matter?" "It always matters," I said. He stared at me for a long time, like he was deciding whether I deserved the truth or whether the truth would only get me killed faster. Then he said, "It wasn't a who." His eyes flicked to the Port Authority stamp on my receipt, then back to me. "It was a where," he said, "and a when." That was the closest thing to an answer he could give without writing his own death certificate. I took the brass key and turned back to the mailbox. The lock resisted at first, like it was considering whether it wanted to cooperate. Then it gave. Soft click. No drama, just compliance. I opened the little door. Inside wasn't a letter, not cash, not even a gun, which would have been almost honest. Inside was a small cloth pouch, tied with string, heavy for its size, and wet, like it had been carried through rain before it got to me. I pulled it out, set it on the counter, and untied the string. A coin slid into my palm. Not money, not really. A token. Brass. Old. The kind you use for a locker at a station or a payphone that doesn't exist anymore. On one side, a number. 4. On the other side, a stamped crest. Port Authority again. I stared at it. The city was consistent, if nothing else. It kept signing its name on the sins it wanted you to forget. The night clerk watched my face like he was reading a report. "What is it?" I asked. He spoke like he was reciting something he'd been told to memorize. Access. Access to what? He leaned closer, and the glass between us made his voice sound even smaller. To a locker that isn't supposed to be there. I kept my hand closed around the token, brass warmed by skin, a piece of the past pretending it was harmless. "And why give it to me?" I asked. His mouth tightened. "Because you already have the other piece." My pocket felt heavier. The ledger copy, the spare key, the receipt. Pieces. Always pieces. The city never hands you the whole thing. It sells you one corner at a time until you realize you've bought the entire nightmare. I took my coffee cup and drank. It was bitter, burnt, real. "Where's locker 4?" I asked. His eyes shifted just once toward the window. Across the parking lot, beyond the fence, there was a service door in the side of the building next to Marlowe's. A door that looked like it led nowhere important. The kind of door that's always locked. The kind of door nobody sees because nobody wants to. The rain outside blurred the world into soft shapes. Headlights smeared into halos. The sign buzzed. The night went on pretending it was normal. "If I go through that door," I said, "I don't come back the same." He nodded slightly. "Nobody does." I didn't move yet. I let the moment breathe. In sleep stories, you don't sprint. You drift. You let the listener follow you without feeling chased. I slid the brass key back into the envelope. I slipped the token into my pocket with the spare key, metal against metal. 2 keys, 1 token, 1 ledger, and a receipt that said the schedule was paid in full. I looked at the night clerk one last time. Is Eddie alive? His expression didn't change, but his eyes did. They tightened the way eyes tighten when they hear a name that costs money. "Alive enough," he said. The same words the watcher had used. Business words. No soul in them. Just function. I stood up from the counter slowly. The booth behind me was warm and safe in the way a lie can feel safe for a few seconds. The door to the diner opened, and a gust of rain-wet air rolled in. A trucker stepped inside, shook water off his jacket, and walked past me without looking. A life that didn't belong to this story. A man with no receipts in his pocket. I envied him. Then I pushed through the diner's side exit and stepped into the rain. It didn't hit hard. It just kept happening. Steady. Patient. I walked across the parking lot toward the service door, the token heavy in my pocket like a question. Above the door was a small light. Dim. Yellow. Like a bulb that knew better than to shine too bright. I stopped with my hand on the handle, and for a second, I listened. Not for footsteps, not for a gun, for something quieter, for the sound of someone waiting. The city always waits. I turned the handle. The door opened with a soft breath, and I went in. The corridor behind the service door smelled like wet concrete and old detergent. A place meant for mops and buckets and things people don't talk about. The light above me buzzed softly, and each buzz felt like the building was thinking. At the end of the corridor was a second door, metal, painted a tired gray. A sign above it read, "Maintenance," in letters that had been scratched and repainted too many times. I pulled it open. Inside was a narrow room with rows of lockers along the wall. Old steel doors, each with a number plate. Most were dented. Some had rust trails like tears. A few had fresh paint, too clean, like somebody had tried to hide the age. The rain sound faded. The room was quieter than it should have been. Quiet rooms are never empty. They're just filled with listening. I walked along the row, counting without speaking. 1, 2, 3, 4. Locker 4 looked different. Not newer, not cleaner, just handled. Like the latch had been touched often, like a hand kept coming back to it. My fingers went to the brass token in my pocket. I took it out, and it caught the light in a dull shine. There was no slot for the token, no obvious place for it. That's how these games work. They make you feel stupid first. They make you doubt what you're holding. Then they show you the simple part you missed, and you hate yourself for missing it. I looked closer at the lock. There was a tiny crest above the keyhole, worn almost smooth. Port Authority. Same stamp, same signature. The token's edge had a notch in it, small, precise. I held the token up to the crest, lined the notch with the worn shape. The metal fit like it had been waiting all its life for this moment. A soft click. The keyhole shifted slightly, revealing a second, hidden slot. I exhaled slowly. Not relief, just confirmation. I took the spare key out, the cold one that had been following me like a curse, and slid it into the newly revealed slot. It turned with a gentle resistance, like the lock was trying to make sure I meant it. Then it opened. Locker 4 swung outward a few inches. The smell inside wasn't rot. It wasn't mold. It was something worse. Paper. Old paper. Damp edges. Ink. The scent of files that had been buried too long. Inside the locker was a thin, black folder, sealed in plastic. And beside it, wrapped in oilcloth, a small cassette tape. A real one. Analog. The kind people used before everything became easy to copy and impossible to erase. On the cassette label, written in neat block letters, Rourke, Dock Fire Statement. My stomach tightened. Names carry. I took the folder first. The plastic crackled softly in my hands, loud in that quiet room. I held it like it could bruise me. Through the plastic I could see a single sheet on top, stamped again. Port Authority. And below the stamp, one line typed clean and cold. Incident. Controlled. Controlled. That word again. Like the lights. Like the schedule. Like the way the city decides what you see. I put the folder back inside the locker for a moment. I took the cassette tape and turned it over in my hands. The tape felt heavier than it should. Not physically, heavier in meaning. A voice trapped in plastic, waiting to be played, waiting to become real. In sleep stories, you don't rush the tape. You don't slam it into a player and flood the room with the past. You let the listener feel the weight first. You let the quiet do the work. I held the tape close, like I could hear through it. Like I could hear Eddie's breath. Like I could hear regret trying to turn itself into an alibi. Behind me, somewhere in the building, a pipe ticked. One small sound, then another. I froze. Not because it was a threat, because it was timing. A man can tell when a room is making noise on purpose. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the locker row reflected faintly in the metal of the opposite wall. For a second, I thought I saw movement, a shift in shadow, a suggestion of a shape. Then, nothing. The city likes to remind you you're not alone. It doesn't always send a gun. Sometimes it sends a feeling. I slid the tape into my coat pocket, then the folder, then the token. I closed locker 4 gently, quietly. I turned the spare key back, locked it again, and left no sign I'd been inside, except for the fact that I was breathing harder than before. I stepped back into the maintenance corridor. The light buzzed. The air felt colder. At the far end, through the thin wall, I could hear the diner again. Muffled voices, a cup clinking, the soft radio. Normal life, pretending the city wasn't eating it piece by piece. I walked out into the rain. The parking lot glistened under the broken sign. Water ran along the curb like it had a destination. I got into my car and didn't start it yet. I held the cassette tape in my pocket and felt its shape through the fabric. The kind of shape that changes a man. On the dashboard, my burner phone lit up. No vibration. No ring.